I am so freaking excited for these next episodes. Like I said at the end of my last video, we finally get to see Ellie take the spotlight and see her coming of age story. But even besides that, we get to see what I consider to be the best of Joel, and finally get to what I consider to be one of the greatest endings in any video game I have ever played. One that still to this day gets discussed and debated online. And trust me, I have a lot to say about this season's ending, what it means for the future of this show, and how this show has beautifully built up to this moment. This show has been amazing so far, and has had me on HBO Max each week, counting down the minutes till the new episode drops. Don't get me wrong, I do envy newcomers of the story, and them being able to experience these plot beats for the first time like I did years ago. But knowing what happens just makes me even more excited to see what this adaptation does next. My excitement for not only the rest of the season, but season 2, and hopefully season 3, I seriously cannot put into words. But I will try when we get to it. Firstly, before we talk about the future, we must first go back to the past.
He's gonna take you back to the past.
Okay, not that far back. Back to before Ellie and Joel met and started their journey together. The start of Ellie's story. This is an episode I've been looking forward to seeing for so long. And now it is finally time to talk about episode 7, Left Behind.
Gay panic, gay panic,
For the first time in this review series, I'm honestly stumped on what to write for this episode. It's quite a simple episode, but it packs a mighty punch. This story's original placement as a DLC, one that it seems quite a lot of few people skipped out on, might make most see this story as not being too important. And sure, if you remove this episode, you won't be lost, but this story is important to fully understand Ellie. We finally get to see Ellie's past at the start of her coming of age story. We see her act like a child and skip school with her crush. We see them go through this heartwarming date with many highs and lows, leading up to a moment of pure happiness, a beautiful kiss, abruptly interrupted by destruction and death. It's such a beautiful story, and one that explains why Ellie is so protective of the people she loves, and subtly establishes her violent tendencies, especially in the added scene at the start with her getting into a fight, and her fascination over the dead body. It's the perfect origin story for Ellie. One everyone needs to experience, and one that I remember fondly years after I first experienced it in the game. Even with my knowledge of the story front to back, there were quite a few additions and changes in this episode that shocked me. Let's go over what I loved about this show's adaptation of this story. The introduction scenes of Ellie at school and her being hit with fascist grooming was a nice addition to show just how alone and lost Ellie is without the people she cares for. She is a very possessive person, like I already said, even to her inanimate belongings, like her Walkman and knife. Being trapped at federal school and being taught to serve their system probably added to this as well. These items she holds and the people she loves are what truly matter to her and what make her feel like herself. We also see in this episode Ellie's fascination with the world before the outbreak. Ellie is 14 in the show, meaning she was born after the infection started. It makes sense why she would want to know more about what life was before everything went away. Very simple things in life we take for granted, such as a shopping mall, something that even today is starting to fade away. It's funny how in the last episode Ellie was making fun of someone for caring about their appearance and who they like, and in this episode we see that she is more interested in an escalator, although she does still worry about those same traits. Speaking of which, sure, the mall itself is impressive as all hell, but it's clear that this trip really is a first date between Ellie and Riley, and the last. Look, there is a lot to unpack with this relationship, most of which I and the show itself have already established, but I'm just gonna be honest with you all. These two's relationship is just adorable as hell. I was squealing throughout most of this episode when they were together. It's cute gay shit. I love cute gay shit. I can't really think of any way to analyze this cute gay shit. I just love it so much. Okay, actually, there is one aspect of this gay relationship I do want to touch on. Well, okay. First off, if you are homophobic and hate this episode, seriously, stop watching the show. The Last of Us is not for you. But secondly, and the main aspect I want to discuss, the show changed the timeline of the outbreak from the game, changing the years of 2003 instead of 2013 in the game. The first US state to legalize same-sex marriage wasn't until 2004, and then all states in 2015. At the time of the outbreak, gay people were still facing discrimination and generally seen by society as taboo. The outbreak put the world on on pause and stop any and all progress queer people in general have made to be accepted. It makes Bill and Frank getting married in episode 3 have a lot more meaning to it, but also makes Ellie and Riley's relationship mean so much more, and explain why the two were even more hesitant to be open to each other about their sexuality. This story is all about love, and how that matters more than anything else in life. In the end, Ellie decides to abandon Fedra, and Riley decides to abandon the Fireflies, which we get to see isn't as heroic as she made it out to be, in order to love each other, because at the end of the day, that is what truly matters. The fact that they are gay hammers the point in even more, showing that they don't care about what the general public thinks either. All they care about is each other. And even in the game, the fact that one of the most beloved video game characters is a lesbian can't be understated. This story was groundbreaking then, and in a way still is today. Not just because it is gay, but because its themes of love are universal. Which brings us to the tragic end of this story. Now, going into the show, I wasn't surprised by them adapting this story, but I honestly had no idea how they were going to tell it. In the game, Ellie and Riley's date is interrupted with Ellie finding supplies to try and keep Joel alive after his injury. So it was no surprise that this is when they decided to tell the story in the show, but I wasn't sure if they would interrupt it again with scenes of Ellie in the present, or if the entire episode was just going to be one big flashback. When the trailer for this episode was released, and there was no footage for the present, I fully expected it to be all a flashback. And the podcast listened to it. They revealed this was the plan initially, but HBO suggested they include Ellie and Joel at the beginning and end. And honestly, that decision led to my absolute favorite scene in this entire series up to this point. Yeah, HBO finally did something right for once. And luckily, we haven't reached episode 9 yet, so I have zero hesitation in saying that statement. This show has strayed from the game in many areas, most of the time to the benefit of the story. This episode, however, is probably the most faithful to the game in all the right places. Specifically, the ending. Riley's speech at the end is almost word for word the same as the game, and is performed incredibly well by Storm Reed. Throughout this entire episode, she does an incredible job matching Ellie's wits, while also giving us some pure emotional moments. But the highlight is this final scene from her. While Ellie is rageful about their impending death, she is silent, having already experienced death and loss with their parents. I believe it is through that loss she is able to tell Ellie that even if their time is limited, even if death is inevitable for them, they still need to fight to be together. Even if love ends in heartbreak, it is still worth it in the end. It is worth fighting for. That speech being juxtaposed with Ellie in the present, fighting to keep Joel alive, was absolutely perfect. Just like how it is in the game. Although how Ellie fights for Joel is quite different. And the added scene of Joel holding Ellie's hand, especially after seeing him in tears earlier telling her to leave, absolutely broke my heart. All of this combined with the original music for the ending of the DLC, and Jesus Christ, this show is amazing. I love it so goddamn much. Just like with episode 3, I expect a lot of people to find this story pointless, but it's through this story we see that Ellie is a fighter inside. Ellie is willing to protect the people she loves and do anything for them, and that includes Joel. Her willingness to do anything to protect others includes violence, as we have seen earlier in episode 4. All this leads us into the next episode, but first, it needs to be said again that this episode was absolutely incredible in every regard. From the incredible music choices, including freaking Take On Me, to the incredible set design of the mall itself, to the beautiful cinematography, mostly feeling handheld except for some key moments, to again, the incredible acting from everyone, and finally, the writing, written by the same writer as the game, Neil Druckmann, who is able to make this episode feel very faithful to the original, with only slight changes to add to the story and help it in this new medium. It's funny how the two main romantic love stories in the show are the one that is completely different from the original, and one that is almost exactly the same as the original. The ability for the show to pick and choose what to keep and what to change perfectly is so impressive, and is why I consider this to be one of the best adaptations ever created. And with the track record the show has had so far, it makes my excitement for these last 2 episodes unimaginable. So, without further ado, let's finally meet a familiar face. A very familiar, beautiful face. Episode 8, When We Are in Need.
Now we're cooking while nobody's looking.
The last episode I struggled to write about because it was one that spoke for itself. This episode also speaks for itself, and I also am struggling to write about it, but for very different reasons. Despite me thinking Nolan North had a better voice for David, and despite that version giving us more time to connect with the character before his twist, this episode turns this character into the most disturbing thing in the show by far. And look, I want to stay positive during these reviews, and I will be talking about that scene when we get to it, but I want to say real quick that this episode was triggering to some viewers, and for very obvious reasons. I don't think they should have cut this moment out, but I do think they should have put at least a warning at the start of this, just so the people that needed it could prepare themselves for this episode, or skip it if they please. Although they would sadly be missing a lot of great moments in this episode as well. I'm gonna try my best to talk about, honestly, David in general respectfully, and you should consider this opening a warning in case you'd rather not hear me talk about everything dealing with him. There'll be a time code in the description, hopefully on screen, if I am not lazy, if you want to skip to me talking about the finale, and I'll give another warning before I talk about the ending of this episode. Some of you probably think I'm being overprotective about this, but I do know some people personally who find this stuff triggering, and I want to make sure this video is safe for them to watch. For now, let's work our way up the ladder of characters for this episode. Let's start with Joel in this episode. The ending of this episode is where I consider to be the moment Joel officially becomes Ellie's father, but it's very clear really since the end of episode 6 that Joel is definitely her father, and is ready to protect her no matter what. In episode 6 as well, we hear Joel's fears of failing her, and in this episode, when she does get kidnapped, we see that fear consume Joel and turn into anger. He goes on a huge killing spree and tortures 2 of David's goons in order to find where Ellie is. I love this scene so much, both in the game and here. I mentioned way earlier in these reviews that Joel had a fire in his heart that is continuing to grow and grow each episode. If it isn't clear already, that fire is Joel's anger, and his fear of losing Ellie is only adding more to it. And it is perfectly shown off here. Pedro again has been mostly quiet in this series, and we don't usually see him raise his voice. But here he is yelling and killing these people with zero hesitation. It's no surprise at this point that I think this show adapted this moment perfectly. I was initially expecting Pedro to torture James in this adaptation, now being played by the original Joel, Troy Baker, but that probably would have been too meta for this mostly serious show. Don't worry though, we'll get to the meta casting in the next episode. Anyway, with all this talk about Joel and Ellie, it's only fair we next talk about Ellie herself. Oh boy, Ellie. Like I said in my last video, in the game, this is where the player finally gets to play as Ellie for the first time. Sadly, the show isn't able to share how powerful of a moment it is to be given control of her, but I think having Left Behind before this and given us 2 full episodes of her being the main character is suitable enough. Her being the main character here is important as, again, The Last of Us is all about her. She is the center of the story, and with part 2 being mostly from her perspective, it is very important to have her take this role early on to get the audience used to her leading the story. With all that being said, as you can expect, I think Bella kills it in this episode. This is without a doubt her best performance in the show so far, and that is definitely saying something. Without a doubt, this episode was the hardest for them to perform. Not just because of the material, but it all being filmed in the cold winter, and the director of this episode, Ali Abassi, doing many takes for these scenes. Ellie going hunting at the start was a nice callback to episode 6, and the scene of her threatening David and James reinforces that she is still young and inexperienced. She still acts a bit like a child, even becoming immersed in the story David tells her, but as we will see in the end, this little sense of innocence she has left will be taken away. We also see her try to protect Joel while he is incapacitated. It's a nice inverse of roles, and it's kind of ironic how in this episode both fail to protect each other in various ways. Seeing her cuddle up next to Joel was such a cute moment as well. Honestly, it is a shame this show didn't spend more time with these two just messing around like with the pun book in episode 4, but I still think this show is effective regardless. There's a reason why this show has made me cry now twice. Yeah, the ending of this episode made me cry like a baby. I want to stress that it's quite rare for any media to do this. The first time I ever remember it happening was when I first played Death Stranding in 2019. 2019! I am 20 years old as of making this video. That's a whole lot of media that hasn't made me cry. What I'm trying to get at is that this show being able to make me cry twice is definitely a surprise to be sure.
But a welcome one.
And this time it really has to do with both the acting of Bella and Pedro, and a line I think we all have been waiting to hear since the start of this show. But in order to get to that scene, we first need to talk about David. So hey, if you don't want to hear me talk about this predator and his creepy shit, skip ahead to the next episode. Honestly, I don't blame you if you do. I've been stalling hard to write and now record my review of this episode just because of this creep. It sucks that this is my real introduction to Scott Shepherd as an actor, because now whenever I see him in anything else, all I'm gonna be able to think about is David. He definitely made this character feel more real than in the game. Again though, I think Nolandorf does a great job in the game, and I prefer his take on the—
And get this, he's a crazy man traveling with a little girl.
line over Scott's. Okay, I'm getting distracted. With all that being said, yes, let's talk about David. Again, I do miss the extra time we spend with him in the game, fighting off infected, and honestly one of the hardest gameplay sections, but the time I spent here learning about the group he leads and how he does that is a nice parallel to Jackson in episode 6, where the place is run by someone who is fit to protect and lead, Maria, while this place is run by your stereotypical creepy pastor. Here the show gives off a strong message that church and state should be separate, and it is 100% right, but also that religion can be used to easily control others, which is also 100% right. Not trying to bash Christians or other religious people here, I just think it's funny when media bashes on how exploitative it can be. And you know, as someone who grew up with a family that tried to force them to be very religious, you know, it feels very vindicating to see this stuff be made fun of in shows like this. Anyway, yes, David is an asshole. From the first scene he talked with Ellie, I was creeped out. The fact that he is both a preacher and was a teacher who taught children around Ellie's age was such a big red flag. It doesn't help that later on he says he's always had a violent heart, and it only gets worse as the episode goes on. The way he treats Alec's daughter, how everyone else in his cult, even her mother, did nothing, really upset my stomach and reminded me way too much of stories where this exact same thing happens in other religious circles. This immediately being followed by zoom in shots of people eating venison and the unnerving music throughout really made this entire scene so upsetting. It's such a big trope to have cannibals in zombie apocalypses. Apocalypse, it's apocalypse. Why did I write apocalypses? It's apocalypse, whatever. It's such a big trope to have cannibals in zombie apocalypse. No, apocalypses. No, apocalypse sounds dumb. I'm gonna actually I'm gonna look this shit up, hold on.
A few minutes later.
Okay, it is apocalypses, but that sounds so weird to say. Okay, it's such a big trope to have cannibals in zombie apocalypses, but I feel like it serves a big thematic purpose for David's character in the show when we later hear him talk about the cordyceps being his quote-unquote awakening to the truth. Speaking of which, yeah, let's talk about that scene. The part that pisses me off the most about this moment is that David is almost completely right in this scene. Not with him justifying cannibalism and him being like Ellie, of course, but he is right that the cordyceps are like a community, as we saw in episode 2. Hell, when he says the cordyceps love, all I could think about was that disturbing scene of the infected kissing Tess. Him also saying that Joel was defending Ellie when he killed Alec was also a great line and 100% right, although that definitely doesn't justify David's actions here. That's the message of the scene, really. While David's saying a lot of truth, he's only saying it all to justify his actions and his creepy-ass self, all culminating in him saying Ellie has a violent heart. From the very beginning, all the way back to the start of Left Behind, Ellie has had a violent heart, one that has continued to grow throughout the series as she's been around Joel. David tries to use his violence to win over Ellie, and it's here his real motives and his predator intentions are shown to Ellie, and she fights back, which leads us into that scene. Again, if you don't want to hear me talk about this, skip to the next episode. Usually in these coming-of-age stories, there is the loss of innocence for the character, and yeah, this is it. Despite everything Ellie has gone through this series, Ellie has still found a way to cling on to what little of her childhood she has left. As the story progresses though, you can see her starting to lose it very slowly, eventually being forced to survive on her own. That's another reason why it was so important in the game to play as Ellie here and experience the story from her perspective. To see her without Joel, without her protector, all leading up to this confrontation with David. The show makes David's intentions more explicit in this scene, and honestly in the whole episode. It is incredibly disturbing. Bella's fear throughout this fight really sells it, finishing it off with one final kill of blind rage, one that is even more brutal than the version in the game. Joel doesn't interrupt her here like in the game. Ellie is able to let out all of her anger, and it is so hard to watch. David's groans stopping 3 hits in, Bella's crying and her pausing multiple times but continuing her attack, and the unsettling music all makes this scene beautifully horrifying. The parallels of this moment to Joel's act of blind rage in episode 1 can't be ignored, and again show that this violence she has was allowed to grow by Joel. Blame him for this moment though would be completely wrong. Ellie grew up in a violent world, shown to us and left behind, and it forced her to become violent like it, all personified into David in this moment. David to me represents everything evil in this world, and honestly might be the only individual I would truly call a villain in this entire series. He forced Ellie to lash out in this moment of self-defense, and let go of all the innocence she had left. The show fleshed out David even more than I thought it would, and it makes this moment hurt even more than in the game. And finally, we get to the end of this episode where Joel finds Ellie. Unlike in the game where he interrupts Ellie lashing out on David, he finds her afterwards, and it makes this moment sting even harder. Joel failed to protect Ellie here from the dangerous world he warned her about in episode 4. Another failure that will haunt him just as much as it will Ellie herself. Ellie is left broken, not able to say words, and not even crying like she was before, just left devastated. Joel comforts her, and finally, instinctively, calls her the same thing he called Sarah all the way back at the start of this story.
It's okay, baby girl. I got you.
Joel calling Sarah baby girl was actually Troy Baker's idea, and what he did instinctively himself during filming, and Neil Druckmann decided to refer back to it here, in this moment where Joel has officially become Ellie's father. Both Pedro and Bella performed this scene perfectly, and made me burst into tears. The perfect way to end this episode. This episode rivals Endurance Survive for the hardest episode for me to sit through, and without a doubt the most disturbing. This is probably going to be the hardest episode for me to rank at the end because of that. Just like in most great stories, we have the lowest point for the characters right before the finale. We'll see Ellie complete her coming of age story by finally reaching the Fireflies and fulfilling her promise to save the world with her immunity. And we'll see Joel reach the atonement stage of his hero's journey, where he will finally show his redemption and bring Ellie to the Fireflies. Right? Right? So here's the deal. For some reason, YouTube doesn't like when I upload longer videos, and it always gets detected by copyright. So here's what I'm gonna do. Episode 9 is my review of it is like 30 minutes long. That's enough for like a full video. So today, if you're watching this when it's uploaded, today, Wednesday, I'm just releasing 7 and 8. My review of 7 and 8. This Saturday will be episode 9. I know this video has been taking so long to get through. This is the only way. This is good. You get 4 good, like, decently length videos instead of 20 minutes, 40 minutes, over an hour. So, yeah, I'm sorry, but this is kind of what we gotta do. But thank you for watching this video. I'll see you Saturday. Don't need to watch Speed Racer. Oh my god, this movie is so amazing. I saw it while working on this video, and I could not stop thinking about it. Oh my goodness, this is my next video where I say, I swear to God, please watch it. Please. It's so freaking good. It is so good. It's like Fast and Furious, but like unironically amazing. It is just, it's so good. This is everything I want from cinema and so much more. Oh my god. I'm not lying. I'm not being ironic here. This movie is like one of my favorites now. I was on the verge of tears during the freaking climax. This movie is good. It is so good. I'm not, listen, forget The Last of Us. Watch Speed Racer. It's on HBO Max. It's on the same platform as freaking The Last of Us. Just watch Speed Racer. This isn't a bit. Just watch it. It's so good. It is so good. Okay, but I'll see you for episode 9.